I want to make sure that he follows through, and I think he will. I don't want to go secondary tariffs on his oil, but I think, it's something I would do if I thought he wasn't doing the job.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he is, quote, pissed off with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, over his approach to a ceasefire in Ukraine. Trump has even threatened to levy tariffs on Moscow's oil exports if the Russian leader does not agree to a ceasefire within a month. The US president indicated that he would levy a 25 to 50% tariff on countries that are buying Russian oil. If this were to happen, it would be debilitating to Russian oil exports, on which the Russian economy depends to a large extent. The abrupt change of direction by Donald Trump came after Putin tried to attack the legitimacy of Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, last week. Appearing on Russian television, Putin had suggested that Ukraine could be placed under a temporary UN-led government, which will then organize elections in Ukraine before a ceasefire. Trump did not like what he heard from Putin's mouth.
Some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that.
Trump has previously called the Ukrainian president a dictator without elections, but now he seems to have changed tack. Trump says that any new leadership in Ukraine means that you're not going to have a ceasefire deal for a long time. He wants to exert pressure on the Kremlin, which has thrown up a string of questions about a peace settlement and only agreed to a limited maritime and energy ceasefire so far. Later, speaking to a group of journalists, Trump also pointed to similar tariffs imposed on Venezuela, which he said had a very strong impact. The US president also warned Iran that if it doesn't make a deal to curb its nuclear weapons program, there will be bombing, the likes of which Iran has never seen before.
We're going to make a decision on secondary tariffs on Iran based on whether or not they're going to make a deal. If they're going to make a deal, then we're never going to put secondary tariffs on. We're going to hope they have a great, long, and successful life as a country. But we'll see what happens. It's very, very interesting. I can't imagine them doing anything else but making a deal. I would prefer a deal to the other alternative, which I think everybody in this plane knows what that is. And that's not going to be pretty, and I do not prefer that.
Officials from both the United States and Iran were engaged in negotiations even as Trump was busy making these threats, including secondary tariffs on Iran, much like he has threatened on Russia. Now, secondary tariffs are a novel idea. The United States introduced a 25% tariff last week on countries that are buying crude oil and liquid fuels from Venezuela, of which the largest happens to be China. Trump accused the Latin American country of sending criminals and gang members into the United States under the cover of migrants. Russian oil exports are already subject to a range of sanctions from the US, UK, the European Union, as well as other G7 countries, which leaves China and India as the two largest buyers of Russian oil. According to data from the International Energy Agency, more than half of Russian oil is bought by the developing bloc of countries. What is not yet clear is whether these measures proposed by Trump would be effective once it comes into force. After all, for the last 3 years, sanctions have been in place against Russian oil. Finland indicated it may have had a role in Trump intervening like this. Just a day before Trump made that threat, he spent a substantial amount of time with the leader of Finland, Alexander Stubb, at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. The two men had breakfast and lunch. They also played a round of golf in what was billed as an unofficial visit. Finland has been one of the countries most affected by Putin's invasion of Ukraine, so much so it has even formally applied to be part of NATO, appending what has been a long-standing policy of non-interference, non-alignment in Finland for the 70 years plus since the end of World War II. So Trump has said that he needs a ceasefire date and that he would prefer that to be Easter, the 20th of April. That's also the day when Trump would have been in office for exactly 3 months. If by then a truce is not accepted or broken by Russia, then Trump has threatened that there will be consequences to pay for Moscow. And those consequences would be sanctions in the form of secondary tariffs as America continues to pile the pressure on Russia up until the 20th. Now, during the election campaign, Trump had said that he would end the Ukraine war within 24 hours. That has proved to be elusive, and his tactics to force Russia and Ukraine into agreeing to the ceasefire so far have been focused only on Kiev. He's tried to bully and pressurize Kiev, but he's not taken the same approach vis-a-vis Moscow.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
Not
cards.
playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
I'm very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives of
anymore.
millions of people.
You think
You're
you-
gambling with World War III.
Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance had publicly berated Vladimir Zelensky at the Oval Office a month ago. That was followed by Washington cutting off both intelligence and military aid to Kiev. Kiev then signed up to a 30-day ceasefire if the Kremlin were to reciprocate. America then restored both intel and military help to Ukraine, but Putin refused to play ball. Putin said earlier this month that although he was in favor of a ceasefire, there are nuances, and any halt to the fighting, he says, should remove the root causes of this war. The Russian president has called for the demilitarization of Ukraine, insisting that the presence of Western troops as peacekeepers would be unacceptable. He's also demanded the full annexation of 4 regions in the eastern part of Ukraine, much of which Russia already occupies. Trump has also claimed to journalists that Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky was trying to back out of a minerals deal. Trump claimed that Zelensky was pulling out because Putin was not keeping his end of the bargain on the ceasefire. Trump also insisted that Zelensky was going back to his old preconditions of security guarantees against Moscow in order to facilitate the ceasefire. Zelensky last week told reporters that the United States was constantly changing the terms of a proposed rare earth minerals deal, but he did not want Washington to think that his administration was against it. Trump's interventions have followed a difficult week for the White House. There was this massive leak involving senior national security officials of the Trump administration, one of whom inadvertently added a journalist into a high security Signal chat group. In those chats, senior administration officials were seen discussing sensitive military plans to attack the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Now, this Signal messaging app and the chats that were discovered and that were revealed by the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, Jeffrey Goldberg, these chats were not authorized by the Pentagon. The Defense Secretary and the National Security Advisor both continue to insist that there was nothing classified, there were no war plans that were discussed in these chats. But the Trump administration has found it difficult to defend these actions beyond a point. Clearly, in the 2 months that he's been in office, Trump is finding the going inside office much slower than what he would have bargained for, certainly much slower than what he promised to the American people.